All right, let's dive right in, shall we? We got a fascinating one today. Confessions of an Economic Hitman, right?
Mm.
By John Perkins.
Yes, indeed. A captivating blend of memoir and expose. It's quite striking how Perkins implicates himself in the system he's criticizing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, his journey. I mean, starts off seemingly normal, regular upbringing, and then boom, he's like a major player in international finance.
Well, the book really emphasizes how intelligence agencies target, individuals who are bright, ambitious, but also maybe have certain vulnerabilities that they
Mhm.
can exploit. And Perkins at that time, yearning for adventure, wanting to belong, he kind of fit the bill.
So he gets this NSA offer, but then chooses the Peace Corps instead. That time in Ecuador had to be a huge eye-opener for him.
Absolutely pivotal. That's where Perkins first encountered the dark underbelly of development, like the exploitation of indigenous communities by, the oil companies. You could say it planted the seeds for his eventual disillusionment, even though he ends up working for Maine, that powerful consulting firm.
Right, and that's where things get really interesting, right? His first assignment as a so-called economic hitman is in Indonesia. Goes in with these almost romanticized ideas about the country, but
Well, reality hits pretty quickly. He's tasked with creating these overly optimistic economic forecasts, those infamous inflated projections that are used to justify huge loans for power plants, loans that would ultimately benefit U.S. corporations and saddle Indonesia with, well, crippling debt.
setting them up for failure, basically.
Exactly. And Perkins actually details his own internal struggle trying to come up with these inflated projections, especially when he's faced with the skepticism of Howard Parker,
Oh, right, right.
an older, more experienced forecaster. You could say Parker represents a kind of voice of conscience, constantly reminding Perkins about the potential human cost.
That's a powerful dynamic. And then there's that scene, the Indonesian puppet show, almost like a satire,
Mm.
with Nixon as this puppet devouring nations.
So symbolic, that puppet show. It really reflects the simmering resentment, the anti-American sentiment that Perkins kept encountering in countries targeted by EHMs, almost foreshadowing the inevitable backlash when economic manipulation is used as this tool for control.
Yeah. And from Indonesia, we're whisked off to Panama, a country with a complex history tied to the Panama Canal. And we've got General Omar Torrijos fighting for Panamanian sovereignty. There's this immediate tension, right, with Perkins' official role, which is to, promote economic development.
Oh, absolutely. Torrijos is deeply suspicious, of U.S. motives. And Perkins is caught in this web of intrigue, trying to push these projects while navigating Torrijos' skepticism.
And amid these high-stakes negotiations, there's this little anecdote. The American family refusing to enter the Panamanian Museum during a visit to the Canal Zone. Perkins and his guide, Fidel, are there.
Such a small moment, but so telling. Speaks volumes about the cultural divide, the sense of entitlement that often accompanies these development projects, and Fidel's reaction, so quiet but firm, defending his nation's pride. You can feel the tension simmering beneath the surface.
It's a reminder that these systems of power have real human consequences, right? Like they fuel resentment that can lead to, well, who knows what.
Absolutely. And in Panama, that resentment, it takes a tragic turn with the death of General Torrijos in a plane crash. Officially ruled an accident, but many, including Perkins and author Graham Greene, believe it was an assassination, orchestrated by those threatened by Torrijos' negotiations.
That's a chilling thought. It's a stark reminder of the stakes and the length those in power might go to maintain control.
And it raises this crucial question about Perkins's role, doesn't it? How much did he actually know or suspect at the time? Was he willfully ignorant or just a pawn in a much larger game?
Tough questions.
Mm.
And from Panama, Perkins finds himself in, well, the opulent world of the Shah of Iran.
Ah, yes. Iran in the 1970s, a showcase of American-backed modernization. But beneath this facade of progress, simmering discontent. And Perkins, once again, tasked with justifying massive infrastructure projects. Only this time, Iran's overflowing with oil money, so there's not even this pretense of loans.
Right, but the underlying goal, it remains the same, using development as a tool to maintain control.
Precisely. And we see this play out in the Shah's ambitious projects, like that controversial flowering desert project, right? Trying to transform these vast stretches of desert into farmland. Ultimately, it led to environmental damage, social disruption, and fueled that resentment towards foreign influence.
Yeah, it highlights the unintended consequences, or maybe the intended consequences, of these top-down development schemes.
Right.
often driven by a lack of understanding of local contexts and cultural realities.
Absolutely. The Shah's lavish lifestyle, his increasingly authoritarian rule, these disruptive projects, it all created this perfect storm for revolution. And then Perkins has this striking encounter with Doc, a former advisor to the Shah, now totally disillusioned and broken. Doc warns him about the Shah's impending downfall, foreshadowing the Iranian Revolution.
A cautionary tale, for sure. A reminder that imposing development, instead of fostering it organically, can backfire spectacularly. And it marks a turning point for Perkins, hinting at his growing unease with his own role.
Definitely. Seeds of doubt are sown. And from the grand stage of Iran, we shift to Ecuador, where Perkins is forced to confront the real human impact of his work.
This is where his personal and professional lives really collide. His relationship with Paula, his Colombian girlfriend, challenges him to see the ethical implications of his actions. Paula, with her connections to the guerrilla movement, argues that these development projects are actually harming indigenous communities, pushing people towards violence.
Her perspective becomes a lens, through which we see the devastating consequences of these grand schemes, how they often benefit the elite at the expense of the poor and marginalized.
And then there's that powerful scene with Manuel, an indigenous leader threatened by armed men to abandon his land for a dam project.
Oh, that scene really drives home the book's central argument about the jackals, those covert operatives who step in when economic manipulation fails to achieve its goals.
It's chilling. A reminder that violence and intimidation are often lurking beneath the surface of these development projects, especially when there's resistance.
And it highlights the complex moral dilemmas faced by those caught in the middle. Perkins is deeply embedded in the system, but starting to question its foundations. A fascinating internal struggle.
Yeah. And from the rainforests of Ecuador, we're taken to, well, the opulent world of Saudi Arabia, where Perkins' role takes a dramatic turn.
Saudi Arabia, after the '73 oil crisis, becomes this pivotal player in the global economy. And Perkins is tasked with figuring out how to recycle petrodollars back into the U.S. financial system. Enter the Saudi Arabian Money-laundering Affair, or SAMA.
SAMA, a prime example of what Perkins calls the mechanics of maintaining U.S. economic dominance. He comes up with a system to funnel huge sums of Saudi oil money into U.S. Treasury bonds, infrastructure projects, military contracts, essentially creating this closed loop
Right.
that benefits both countries alike, but with huge geopolitical consequences.
It really speaks to the moral compromises required of those operating within these systems of power. The lines blur, personal relationships get tangled up with economic and political agendas.
So we're seeing how Perkins' journey reflects these larger forces shaping global events.
And as we move forward, we'll see how those forces lead to his breaking point and his attempts to expose the truth about the EHM system and its impact on the world.
We left off with Perkins, really wrestling with his place in the system, right? Those moral compromises weighing on him. He starts his own energy company, tries to distance himself, but
Then comes the death of Jaime Roldos, newly elected president of Ecuador in 1981, officially a plane crash. But the circumstances, very suspicious.
Roldos, he was a reformer, wasn't he? Trying to challenge the hold that foreign corporations had on Ecuador's oil.
Exactly. And his death. It sent shockwaves through Perkins. It brought back those fears, What if he spoke out? What happens if you go against the system you've been a part of?
He starts to see a pattern, right? Not just Roldos, but Omar Torrijos in Panama, too.
Yeah.
Both leaders who opposed U.S. interests, both dying in these plane crashes.
Perkins connects the dots, sees it as part of a larger trend, a pattern of silencing those who dissent, those who threaten the established order.
It raises some seriously disturbing questions. How far will those in power go to maintain control? And it makes Perkins' own role, his involvement in these systems, that much more troubling.
He's grappling with guilt, with complicity. And as he's dealing with his past, he's also watching the EHM model itself evolve.
You mean becoming more sophisticated?
Yes. Perkins argues that this global empire, as he calls it, is expanding beyond those traditional infrastructure projects. It's encompassing whole sectors now, energy, finance, even healthcare, all being shaped to serve corporate interests.
So it's not just about building dams and power plants anymore. It's about controlling the systems that drive the global economy.
Precisely. And the EHMs. They're no longer this small elite group. Perkins describes it as a vast army. Consultants, bankers, corporate execs, all pushing the same agenda, often without even realizing it.
They become the new face of empire.
In a way, yes. And Perkins, with his insider knowledge, starts to see how they advance this agenda. Through free trade agreements, deregulation, privatization, all packaged as economic progress.
But progress for whom? Perkins makes it clear. The benefits usually flow to a select few, while inequality rises and the environment gets destroyed.
He's making those connections, showing how seemingly separate events, policies, are all part of a system designed to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a global elite.
So Perkins' personal journey, it's intertwined with these larger global trends, like a microcosm of how the system works, and the people who keep it going, knowingly or not.
And as we move into the 1990s, we see those trends come to a head in a major geopolitical event, the First Gulf War.
Saddam Hussein, once a U.S. ally, suddenly he's public enemy number one, accused of threatening oil supplies, world peace, the whole 9 yards.
Perkins argues the real reason, maintaining U.S. control over the Middle East and its oil. He even suggests that the U.S. encouraged Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, using it as an excuse for military intervention.
That's a chilling thought, that the EHM playbook, the tactics Perkins used to be a part of, could be used to justify war and regime change.
He sees the Gulf War as a turning point. The mask slips, and the true face of empire is revealed.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? He ties those events to the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq.
He sees it as a continuation of the same strategy, using fear, propaganda, military force to secure resources, maintain that global dominance.
And at the heart of it all, Perkins says, is the corporatocracy.
Right. This system where corporations have gained so much power, so much influence, they pretty much dictate policy. Profits over people, profits over the planet, shaping laws and regulations to benefit themselves.
And he's not just talking about oil and defense companies.
No, he points to industries across the board. Pharmaceuticals, agribusiness, all these sectors with huge influence over governments, over international institutions.
So we're seeing this vast, interconnected system of power and exploitation. And Perkins' story is woven right through it. It's a pretty bleak picture.
It can feel that way, especially as Perkins describes the human cost, the environmental destruction. But he doesn't just leave us in despair.
There's hope.
There is. By exposing these systems, shining a light on how they work, Perkins believes we can start to challenge them. Awareness is that first step towards a more just, more sustainable world.
So it's not about feeling overwhelmed, feeling powerless. It's about recognizing the problem and taking action.
Exactly. And that action can take many forms. Supporting alternative models of development, holding our leaders accountable, making informed choices about how we consume, how we participate in the global economy. There's so much we can do.
So Perkins' story, even though it's dark and unsettling at times, it ultimately offers a message of hope. We have the power to create a different future, but we have to be willing to confront the systems that create injustice and inequality.
And he challenges us to imagine a world where those in power actually prioritize the well-being of everyone and the planet, not just their own interests.
That's a vision worth fighting for. But how do we get there? What concrete steps can we take to challenge these seemingly impossible systems? We'll explore that as we dive into the final part of Perkins's Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We've been following John Perkins's journey, haven't we? From eager recruit to disillusioned economic hitman, uncovering this intricate web of global finance, political maneuvering, and those unsettling patterns of accidents that seem to plague leaders who don't cooperate.
And what's really remarkable is how Perkins acknowledges his own complicity.
Doesn't shy away from it. Admits to enjoying the perks, the money, the travel, being close to power.
But there's this persistent question, right?
But what if I'm wrong about the whole system?
It's like a gradual awakening for him, fueled by his experiences, his relationships, and the courage of those who resist.
Like Paula, his Colombian girlfriend. She really opened his eyes to the impact these projects have on indigenous communities.
She's the one who pushes him to see the real human cost. How these grand development schemes disrupt traditional ways of life, and how they often only benefit a select few.
And then there's that scene with Manuel, the indigenous leader threatened to abandon his land for the dam project.
That scene's powerful. It's where Perkins confronts the reality of the jackals, those who use violence and intimidation to achieve what the EHMs can't through economic manipulation.
It's a chilling reminder that behind all the talk of progress and development, there's a darker side, a reality of exploitation and coercion.
And Perkins ties these personal experiences to the bigger picture, the rise of what he calls the corporatocracy.
He argues that we've created a system where corporations basically hold more power than governments. They dictate policies, prioritize profit over people and the planet.
And he doesn't hold back. He names names, calls out specific corporations and individuals who have profited from this system.
It's what makes the book so controversial, so compelling.
But here's what I find really interesting. Perkins doesn't leave us with just doom and gloom. He offers a vision for a different kind of future.
one based on cooperation, sustainability, respect for all life.
He calls for a complete shift in consciousness, rejecting the materialistic consumerist values that got us here.
A return to community, reconnecting with nature, recognizing that our well-being depends on the well-being of the planet.
And he reminds us, we have the power to create this future. Our choices matter, and even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Confessions of an Economic Hitman, what are your biggest takeaways?
I think it's the importance of questioning the narratives we're given, digging deeper, looking beyond the surface.
Yeah, it's so easy to just go along with things, accept the status quo.
But Perkins' story reminds us that we have a responsibility to be informed, to think critically, to challenge unjust systems.
It's not about being passive. It's about taking action, however small, to create the world we want.
Supporting local businesses, pushing for policy changes, even just talking about these issues with friends and family. We all have a role to play.
Perkins leaves us with a thought-provoking image. Imagine those iconic symbols of corporate power. The Nike swoosh, the McDonald's arches, the Coca-Cola logo, transformed into symbols of companies dedicated to sustainability and social justice.
It makes you rethink the entire system.
What if corporations use their power to create a world where everyone thrives, instead of exploiting people and resources?
It's a radical idea, but Perkins reminds us the world is shaped by how we dream it.
So let's dream big. Let's challenge the status quo. Let's create a future where Confessions of an Economic Hitman becomes a relic of the past.